Welcome back to the hashtag I'm My Everywhere show. Thanks so much, Richard Field, for joining us today. Thank you, Richard.
No, thanks, Josh. I'm pleased to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you are very active in the common world in the UK, and people know you from being at SkyTap for many years. And I think that a lot of people are curious to hear about your story, how you got involved in the cloud space. Being in the cloud space, in the IBM space is interesting, and I think that people would be interested to hear how you got started. You mind sharing a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I started in this business around, or it must be 1987. I was probably about 3 at the time. I started working for a company that had something called an IBM System 36. Actually, when I joined the company, I really started as a accounts gopher. I didn't really start with an IT job, but when I was interviewed, the finance director, and this goes back to the time when computing was really a function of finance. There was no IT directors and CIOs and even IT departments. And he said, was I any good with how things have changed? And he said, how are you with computing? And I said, I'm really good, which is a very arrogant thing to say at 17. But I took to that. I leant towards the more computing side, working on the System 36 and Lotus 123 spreadsheets, if anybody's old enough to remember that. And after about 2 years, I went and asked if I could not do any accounting stuff and just do the IT stuff. And I was 19, and I walked into the finance director's office expecting to be fired. And he actually said, yes, believe it or not. He said, yes, here's yours. Go and run it, which was scary. We had 2 big System 36s, the 5360s, the ones that were like a massive chest freezer, which is extraordinary, the big white things. And then as the company grew, we got AS400. We had a B60, so the first generation of AS400s from about 1993. And then we got one of the first, I think it was actually the second in the UK, of the black AS400.
Oh, the red lighting?
But they were quite small. They were like a little filing cabinet. And I remember our finance director was very disappointed because the tape drive was bigger than the server, and he didn't think he'd got great value for money out of that. So yeah, that's when I started in AS400. I had a few months out doing Unix technical support, curiously enough, and then I went back to the IBM world, started working for a business partner in 1995, again doing pre-sales technical and product management for a partner. I worked for about a dozen years as a self-employed consultant, just doing IBM. I did everything, really. Sales, business development, technical, pre-sales, the whole lot. Then I joined SkyTap in October 2021. The rest is history. As I say, I joined as a cloud architect, so again, as a pre-sales person before moving into more of an alliances role. But yeah, it's been quite a journey, Josh, I have to say. It's been a long time.
I'm really curious to hear about the beginning. The way that IT was structured back then, it sounds like it was not the IT that we've come to know and love today. It sounded like it was mostly having some financials involved, and there's some IT people, or they were like these quasi people. Walk us through a little bit about that.
Yeah, and it was, as I said, it was a very different world because there was never really any IT people as such. It was just somebody would be the person who would load the tapes or the diskettes even in that day. And there wasn't really ever an IT department. And these things were only ever local. You had your System 36 or early days of AS400. It didn't talk to anything else. It didn't communicate. There was no networking. There was no WANs and stuff. They were all kind of standalone. And when I joined that company, then I really joined to work in accounts, and it developed from there and snowballed from there. We used to have to get consultants in who did everything because they were always the expertise, and I was self-taught, if you like, and said I can do these things. But I steered more towards the computing side, really, because it was the only thing I passed at school. But no, it's not entirely true. Not entirely. The only thing I got a good grade in, anyway. It was clearly I had some interest. I just probably hadn't really figured it out at that point. But as I got into it, it became more interesting. And as I started working on 36 and then later AS400, you realize what a great platform it is, and amazing that it stood that test of time. I went to the launch in Birmingham of the AS400 in 1988, although we didn't get one for some time afterwards. But amazing that so many times people have said it's finished, it's over, and here we are, what's that, 40 years on or something nearly, and it's still there.
When you're talking about that, it's like a very interesting topic, and because I hear that a lot, they would get involved in like 1994, and there's people are telling them it's a dead system, what are you doing, why are you getting involved? And here we are at 2025. Maybe you could share, or maybe do you have an opinion as to what contributed to the power's longevity?
I think it's all the things that the AS400 and System 36, 38 and all those forebears were really built around. It's an integrated system, and it's only really the last of the integrated systems, possibly apart from mainframe. It's that last vestige of secure, reliable, transactional processing that underpins so many businesses. If you go back to AS400 and you remember what AS400 actually meant, it was about applications, and applications ran on AS400s because that's what ran people's businesses, and they stayed there and they just keep on working. It's a bit like a reliable car. You think, how long did the Volkswagen Beetle last? Just because it did the job that it was intended to do. And I'm not to say that it's old like the Beetle because it's developed and developed. It is still very much a modern system. I think it's the perception is that it's legacy. Certainly we don't term it as legacy, we term it as specialist because of what it does. But I think that it's that security and integration capability and the fact that it just sits in the corner and runs and you don't have to worry too much about it. People talk about databases and DBAs and does this run Oracle, and just go, no, you don't have to worry about that. Do I have to have somebody to look after the DB2? No, you don't.
One of the things that I think you have a unique position, being from your actual IT background, and then you step into a role in the MSP world. And you could talk about trends from that perspective and the hybrid cloud as well.
Yeah, just the world is full of buzzwords, isn't it? And it always has been. You know, if you go back years ago, you had distributed computing and consolidation and virtualization. Now everybody's talking about cloud and AI and machine learning and stuff like that. Cloud is definitely a direction in the market. I think it's something that has changed. Probably what's changed to make that possible is the technology that is now available. And that really has steered that direction. And I think if I look back in what's approaching a sort of towards a 40-year career, even 10 years ago, perhaps less, I would have probably been one of those naysayers saying, I can't see mainframe going to the cloud. I can't see IBM going to the cloud. Yeah, it's fine for commodity workloads, x86 Windows, but is the big stuff, the enterprise stuff, going to go there? And that's definitely the direction. And what's driving that is part that cloud is a buzzword, but it's more than a buzzword. It is a trend, it's a direction. And what it drives is the integration with all of the other capabilities that you can then benefit from. Because it's not just moving AS400 into the cloud for the sake of it, moving AS400 into the cloud. Okay, you can do that if you want to do that. But what does it do? What does it do for your business, both in terms of value and how do you actually value that value? Is it monetary value? Well, in part, maybe. But what does it do in terms of agility? And what does it do in terms of utility? Where does it get you? What does it help you do? And cloud is part of a journey. It's part of a modernization journey. It's not a product in and of itself. It's very much more part of a bigger picture. And I think if you look at it like that, then it becomes much more meaningful and much more interesting, I would say.
I think that you're right about the buzzword part of it, because cloud sounds like a very nice thing to do, but the question is how to do it and focusing on what can it do for you. I think that one of the most interesting things for me is whenever I talk to IBMI customers that are, quote, planning to move off the IBMI and then hearing about these failed projects, like they spent millions and millions of dollars and now they're actually just going back to the IBMI. From your line of work, have you been seeing those type of trends as well?
Yeah, definitely, Josh. It's not to say that there aren't projects out there where people have migrated an old, let's use that word legacy again, an old legacy green screen application that runs on an old AS400 and moved it into a cloud native solution and accrued the benefits of that. Yes, of course they happen, but for every one that is successful, there's another one that's failed, that's not reached the end game that the customer were looking for. And I think part of that is, again, is you've got to see this as a journey and a roadmap, and you can't just jump from zero to the end game in one go. It's really time consuming. It's really costly. The chances of success are not always 100%. And therefore you see these customers who expend an enormous amount of dollars. And I've heard of projects that were multi-million dollars, tens of millions of dollars, and then they've got 5 years into it and had to abandon it. Or they've half done it and then they kept the AS400 box anyway because there was something critical that it couldn't actually do. So the way that I see this is you've got to take it into bite-sized chunks. You've got to look at it as going, okay, I'm here. I have this green screen application running on a data center based IBMI server. And okay, it runs my business, but what can I do to start towards that modernization journey? What is my end game and what are the points along the way? It's a bit like planning a road trip. Yeah, of course you want to get to the end point, but you've got to look at where you're going to stop off on the way. Otherwise, you're never going to get there because you're going to fall asleep halfway. So you've got to break it down and go, where does cloud infrastructure fit into this? Does that take me along that roadmap, that journey towards modernization? Does delivering my infrastructure in a more modern and agile way help me along that path? And the answer typically is going to be yes. What is the next stage of that? Can I deliver that old green screen application that new people who are coming out of university now can't get their heads around? Can I deliver that in a more modern and agile way and integrate that application with cloud cloud services that sit in hyperscalers and so on. There's lots of great stuff that sit out in the cloud, in the hyperscalers, which you can leverage if you can deliver your transactional systems into that cloud space as well. So then you're a little bit further along that cloud journey. And it may be then you go, okay, that's great. I'm now on a pathway towards my end game. Or it may be that you go, actually, I've achieved what I wanted to achieve. And that's probably far enough. It hasn't cost me an enormous amount of money. It hasn't cost me an enormous amount of time. My success is good. That's great. But at least it gives you options.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because making it all in one shot, that big bang, doesn't necessarily work, and having it as like a modernization journey as you're going along is probably the most effective and cost effective and less disruptive way of going about your modernization. And when you started out like in 2021 in the cloud business, and you mentioned a little bit about some of the technology has changed, and how are conversations changed specifically from like 2021 to 2025? What have you seen in the marketplace?
I think that it's a really good question, and I'll come back to that, but you probably need to take a step a couple of years before that, Josh, and go, what was the trend in the marketplace? As I said, I was one of those who didn't think this would happen or be taken up. And then I started to see that there was much more talk about cloud and hyperscalers. What I started to find was that customers that I was working with were having conversations about moving their IBM I that I was working on projects for into cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud, public cloud, whatever. And you suddenly wake up and go, wow, this really is on the lips of IT directors and so on. So as I said, I joined SkyTap in 2021. SkyTap's power service was relatively new there. I think it had been running for probably about 12 months, 18 months or so on. And they'd had moderate success. What I've seen in that 3.5 years from then to now is a massive acceleration, not just of adoption, but also of the understanding and the technology that sits around it. So, it's not just that SkyTap has developed as a product offering and as a solution, but the other pieces that sit around it are much more cloud-centric too. Availability tools, backup tools, security tools, that they're all being much more built around the cloud world than an on-premise world. So I think the whole world has changed. And I think more and more customers are looking at cloud very much more of a when will I have to be thinking about it.
I think it's changed from if.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or to no way to when.
Yeah, definitely. I've definitely seen that shift in the last three to 4 years. It's very much more a when than an if or no way, as you say.
And I think that's really interesting, specifically the technologies that are surrounding it, because it's not just putting your thing inside the cloud. It's not like that. You need to have the ancillary systems, the security, the development tools that are sitting together with the IBM I in the cloud, wherever it is, and then being able to put those all together as a package, because just living in a vacuum doesn't really work so well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can't live in a vacuum. And I think this is something that even we've had to learn within SkyTap, is that SkyTap as an infrastructure as a service product is great. It does what it says. What we've learned as a business is that particularly IBM I customers see their IBM I as part of a solution. So you have to have a solution that incorporates those things, partly because it's necessary. So we mentioned things like backup and high availability. You still need those things, and therefore they need to be part of the solution that you're taking to your customer base, but also because then start to use their imagination and go, actually, if my IBM I is now running in the cloud, what else can I do? Can I now run my DevOps in the cloud and make use of the cloud tools that are available out there? And they start talking about Git repositories and using Jenkins and VS Code and Azure pipelines and so on. And suddenly the whole world changes, particularly when you link some of that tooling with the rapid deployment of IBM I test instances, for example, in SkyTap. You suddenly go, wow, I can spin up a test instance in 5 minutes, whereas it used to take me 3 weeks before. That's the kind of clever stuff that suddenly the developers and the application owners get on board with.
No, certainly. Maybe you want to share a little bit about your love with IBM I. What draws you to IBM I? What makes it special to you?
I think it's the fact that it's such a strong platform and the technology that went into it, the thinking that went into it. If you think that IBM I was the first RISC operating platform, processing platform, way before anybody else got to 64-bit architecture, the single level storage and the object-oriented architecture, all that kind of stuff that underpins it, that people don't talk about these days, but actually is still there and still very much what makes it such a stable, secure, reliable platform. The things that you would have to do to manage a Windows server, you just don't have to do on an IBM I. We talked about managing databases. You don't have to manage databases on IBM I. Everything is all just there. You don't have to go and buy third-party tools to do simple functions and so on. It's all just built into the operating system. And that's amazing when you think that actually a lot of that architecture goes back to System 38, 3638, 34 really brought together into the AS400, and they brought the best pieces of those together. It's an amazing technology, and it stood the test of time so well that it's got to be lauded as being generational discovery, along with kind of Google. So it's, yeah, the fact that it's not disappeared really tells you all you need to know about that kind of, all those people saying, oh, it's dead, it's a dead platform. You alluded to it, Josh, it's going away. Why would you get into a career in iSeries? Here we are. Still, you look at 100 companies in the UK, S&P 500 in the US, you look at the list of those companies, and use of S400 IBMI is 90% of them. There's got to be a reason why that is. They use mainframe, they use IBMI. And even though so much stuff has moved to Linux and Windows and what have you, but the effort to run a system on IBMI compared to running it on those more sort of commodity-based servers is so much less. You know, that ROI, total cost of ownership argument still stands as it did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
Yeah, certainly. I think that people don't realize what it costs to replace an IBMI. Whether it's a cloud or Linux or Windows or whatever you're doing, to get it to be the same level as an IBMI. I read all the time Jungle writing about, oh, they've gotten so much more expensive. That's true. There's no doubt that hardware has gotten more expensive and storage has gotten more expensive. But let's think about, what are we comparing it to? Are we comparing it to IBMI alone, or are we comparing it to the rest of the world?
Yeah. I remember talking to a software vendor who could deploy their application on, so they could deploy it on Windows. It's the same basic application. And they stood in a meeting room with the customer and said, you could deploy it on Windows and you need this server. And there's an application server, and then there's a database server, and there's a backup database server. And then and they drew all these servers, and literally the whiteboard just got filled with Windows servers. And we were just sat there with our heads spinning going, what, another server and another, and there's a backup for that? And I think they ended up with 11 servers. And I sat there and I said, and if we deployed it on IBMI? And he literally just drew one server in the corner, and he went, you could just put it on one IBMI server instead. And
I have a similar story. This guy, he's one of my favorite people in the IBMI space. He's based out in Cleveland. He tells me that he was in a big board meeting with a lot of different companies all together in one place, and they're talking about their server farms. They have these huge server farms. They have 60, 70 servers all together, and they ask him, how many servers do you have? One. They're like, are you okay? What are you running? IBM? Yeah. Oh. What's IBM? Yeah. No, that's what, guys, my IT costs are like a quarter of yours. Come on.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's a crazy world. We used to describe the Windows servers as like rabbits, because they would just breed everywhere. Before you knew it, you'd got hundreds of the things, thousands of the things, and all those things that you could do in one server on IBMI, you'd have to have 20, 30 servers to do in Windows. And that still holds true now. I think it's an amazing legacy, in the nicest term of the word, rather than as a legacy platform, but an amazing legacy of the foresight of the people who invented it, that all those things that they could do literally back to 1995. That's 30 years ago, Josh. They brought out 64-bit processing 30 years ago. It's crazy. And how long did it take for other platforms to catch up? The technology is amazing and still has very much a strong place to play. That's why I'm so enthused about the platform, in a way that you can't get enthused about things like IX. It's a great operating system, no doubt, but it's not the same.
I think one of the funniest parts about IBMI is that it's such a community. I think it's such a unique place, because I have lots of friends across many different verticals and who work in many different operating systems, and they work at all of these other places. I don't think I've ever heard anyone talking about, oh man, I love this system. I would give this thing a hug. Yeah. there's my old workplace, they had an old AS400, and with the red lettering and everything. I took a picture of it one time and I posted online, and people got so upset, like, how could you put a plant on top of the AS400? You can't do that. It's a filing cabinet. Like, I'm allowed to put it up there. It's not doing anything. It's not plugged in. It hasn't worked in 20 years, but the love of the platform, it's kind of like they want to give it a hug.
It's like the mahogany coffee table, isn't it? But it's that you can't, don't spoil it. Don't put coffee on it. I got a great story for that. I went to see a customer who were a Chinese food wholesaler many years ago, and they had two AS400s. One was their production system, which was reasonably modern, and they had another one which was their old development system, which was, believe it or not, still one of those like E20 type boxes, the sort of the tall filing cabinet ones. Believe it or not, the E20, whatever it was, sat in the middle of their staff room, their sort of staff canteen, literally in the middle, still plugged in and working. And every lunchtime, all of the staff gathered and they put all their food on top of it, because it kept them all the food warm, and they ate their dinner off it, which many would see as sacrilege, but I just thought that is just brilliant. I just love that.
There's another story like this, is that this guy told me that they sell milled corn. So it's dusty. It's really dusty. The people that work there, they would go in, they wear these suits, and they come out covered in corn, because you're milling it and you're taking care of it. There's just stuff in the air. And then he comes to this business. He comes in and he sees like in the corner of this warehouse is this IBMI stuffed with, I don't know, 4 or 5 inches worth of corn dust on it. And it's been running for 30 years. It's just going.
Yep. And they don't ever break. They
Never.
don't ever break. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. I can also remember our 5360 System 36 boxes. We didn't have air conditioning in the computer. This was before all of that. You didn't need to do that. But we used to have to leave the windows open in the summer just to get some airflow through. And somebody came in over the weekend and closed the windows because they thought it was a security risk. And when I came in on the Monday morning, the temperature in the computer room had been up to 49 degrees centigrade. That's like the box living in Death Valley, isn't it? It's 49 centigrade. That's like 150 or something Fahrenheit. And the boxes were still running, believe it or not. There was dead flies all over the floor. But yeah, the flies couldn't survive, but the boxes carried on running and they still worked. So yeah, they're amazing bits of kit. Amazing.
That's amazing. You know, I love that. I love that piece. People don't talk about that and people don't realize that the value, like I've been seeing a lot of IBM going to and talking about helping out with S4HANA, SAP S4HANA, and running things on their power systems. And it's known whether SAP wants to agree to it, but RISE doesn't work as well as Power. That's just the way it goes. I think it's testament to the box. I think that the box is not like limited just to the IBMI like operating system. It really it's just a server, and the server aspect of it is able to run so many different workloads and so many different things in the TCO of it, and the ability to change itself, to be malleable enough to be able to run all these things in faster and less expensive.
Yeah, exactly. And you can't ignore that. And if you go back to the technology that has been built into IPMI sort of first to get to that RISC processor and so on, but if you think what we've been able to do over that time, we've been able to run things like WebSphere, Java, Windows under the covers, Linux and AIX under the covers. We can still do runtime AIX now. And we can do all of this stuff without needing different boxes to do it. And that in itself is just, if you can drive up that utilization and that consumption on one box, that's got to be good. That's got to be good, particularly when you've got more and more data centers, which are literally, I have no more room, I have no more power, I'm chock-a-block. And yet we've got these servers that you can literally run them 100% capacity all day with 20 different workloads all divided up. It's crazy. I can't think of a parallel in anywhere else that anything would have that sort of longevity. Yeah, it's an amazing platform, and there is an amazing community. I know there's a Microsoft community out there. There's events around Microsoft, and I get that. I absolutely. But is there a kind of a groundswell of love for Windows out there? What do we spend most of our time doing? We just curse Windows for being unreliable, and yet there's a community out there that support IBMI and want to see it flourish, fiercely defend it for being what it is, which is amazing, really, and something we should be celebrating more of.
Agreed. I think that part of it is because of the fact we're an underdog. I think that part of it is like when I talk about Cleveland, Ohio, it's the underdog of the world. It really is. It's not like anything fancy. No one's coming along saying, "Oh man, I would love to visit Cleveland." No one's saying that, and it's never been out. No one. I'll share with you a quick story. Is that one of my friends? I was visiting him and his parents. I was a young kid, and they were based out in like Chicago. And his parents asked me, "So where am I from?" I said, "I'm from Cleveland." And his mom and his dad look at each other. Wait, what are we gonna say about? And I see the sweat coming down their brow. What are they gonna say? And they're like, looked at me like, "Josh, you guys have really nice rest stops." I was like, "Are you kidding? That's all you can say? That means you've never stepped in here ever." And I think that's the point. I think it's the same thing with IBMI. I think that people just, oh yeah, they work sometimes. They've been working for 35 years. They're running your business for every single transaction in the past 35 years, and you're a multi-billion-dollar company. But I don't know anything about it. Oh, yeah, it's like a nice little rest stop.
Nice rest stop.
It bugs the heck out of people, because like you're telling me that the thing that I've invested my entire life in is this loser platform, and it riles people up a little bit, because and to your point, as you mentioned earlier, is that like there's so many people, like the companies that are running the IBMI, like it runs the gamut. It doesn't make a difference what company you are, and what size you are. It is running your business.
Absolutely. It's like a sort of very sensible, reliable, multi-purpose, everyday car. It just starts every morning, it gets you there, whatever the weather, and it gets you to your destination comfortably. And everybody's raving about the much more exciting one that was much louder or much faster or whatever it might be, but broke down 3 times on the way. But it gets all the press because everybody goes, "That's a beautiful looking car." Whereas you're just like, it's the sort of, what's the expression, the hare and the tortoise or something. It's just like, get you there, but it's not going to be very exciting, but it just runs the business. It just gets on with it. And therefore it doesn't get the attention of all of the needy ones that are in front of it in the pecking order because it just gets on with it. And we're all quite shy and retiring people who work in the IBMI space. We don't shout from the rooftops about it. We just get our heads down and get on with it.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing. A guy tells me a story. He tells me that he was a manufacturer and they had a tornado or a microburst. That's what it was called, microburst. Microburst is like this crazy weather thing. It destroys the entire manufacturing plant. It's gone. All windows are gone. Everything's destroyed. He has his IBMI running in there too. So the power is down and he's devastated. Like this entire place is destroyed. And then he gets a generator, plugs in the UPC cord, powers right back up. Everything just goes. The place is apocalyptic around him, but it's no problems.
Yeah. Just as there's loads of stories like that. A customer in the UK had somebody ram raided their building and they literally rammed a forklift right through the wall. They happened to come in through the computer room and they hit the server that was stood on the floor with the forklift and all of the wall, brought the wall down on the servers and shoved it about 4 foot across the room and caused massive damage to the wall and the infrastructure and the floor and everything like that. Believe it or not, the box didn't even go down. It just carried on. And it had been hit by a forklift and pushed across the room and it carried on working. That's amazing. They were expected to come into an absolute mess because obviously this was, the police called them and said somebody's ram raided your building and they've smashed up your computer room, and they went in there and the server's still going.
You can't make this stuff up.
You can't make this stuff up. But I know the last one really was, goes back to System 36 boxes, but one of the local councils, System 36, was actually in their workshop where they were fixing the refuse trucks. So it was in there with literally, and these things are filthy, you can imagine. They're absolutely disgusting. They were MIG welding next to it. They're using electricity to melt metal, to weld things back together again, right next to. So it's like thousands of volts and stuff this is going on right next to these servers. And again, they never missed a beat. They're fixing broken bits and stuff.
Insane.
Yeah, never mind these sort of temperature controlled dust environments. They were literally like rubbish trucks, welding rubbish trucks next to them, and they carried on. It's a crazy world.
Richard, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining. If you ever want to share a story or be on this podcast, give me a ring. Talk to you soon. Thanks so much.